Good evening, everyone. So we are going to analyze the questions on modern Indian history. So there are two questions this time, and like the first question is, evaluate the policies of Lord Curzon Lord Curzon and their long-term implications on the national movement. Right, and the aspect is to basically discuss. Right, so evaluation है, discussion already लिखा हुआ है उसमें. Now, how do you approach this question? First of all, while approaching any question, you should focus on the basic elements of the question. So the question is saying evaluate policies of Lord Curzon. So first of all, we should be aware about the policies of Lord Curzon. And second aspect is that what was their long-term impact on the national movement. Meaning when we are discussing the policies of Lord Curzon, then those policy measures are to be taken more cognizance of, which have a long-term impact on the Indian national movement, right? So that means we have to develop a macro perspective instead of a micro perspective. So first of all, if we look at the policies of Lord Curzon, so what will be the approach? You can structure your answer. You can simply list down the different actions or different policy measures which were taken by Lord Curzon, and then you can talk about the long-term impact. But the major challenge for the student from the perspective of preparation is that the way the books of modern Indian history are written, then when you will be discussing about the Swadeshi movement, only then your Lord Curzon comes into picture. So therefore, the biggest challenge for the student who is writing this particular answer will be that those students who will be limited to just the Swadeshi movement, yes, they will be able to analyze the long-term impact, that is fine. But are you able to add a little more of the policy actions which do not relate to Swadeshi movement, which relate to something else, something other than the Swadeshi movement? So therefore, how to prepare for it? The way to prepare for it is that whenever you are reading all these different chapters of modern Indian history, and whenever any, let's say, any act is mentioned with the year, then simultaneously what you should do is you should go to Wikipedia or your own list of the different governor generals and the viceroy, and you should extract that, okay, who was the governor general at this point of time, right? So when you do this, now the chapter, it will not be mentioning the name of the governor general or the viceroy. It will be simply discussing one particular legislative measure, one particular administrative action and its impact. It is for the student to basically make this extra effort to identify that who was the governor general or the viceroy at that point of time. And you should have a separate A4 paper where you write the name of that governor general, and whenever you are encountering such a kind of a thing, just enlist it. The reason is that UPSC has time and again asked about the policies of different governor generals. Very recently there was also a question on Lord Dalhousie, right? Lord Dalhousie was from 1848 to 56. So therefore, if you simply just focus upon the doctrine of lapse of Lord Dalhousie, but you do not take into account the other measures which are taken by Lord Dalhousie, then your answer will be incomplete, right? Obviously, the major chunk in the case of policies of Lord Curzon, it will be attributed to the Swadeshi movement, the partition of Bengal, which was effected by Lord Curzon. It was decided in 1903, effected in 1905. Right? So therefore, if we look at the policy, so briefly in your introduction, what you can talk about, that Lord Curzon, he was there from 1899 to 1905, right? So briefly you can mention his ideology. What was his ideology? So with respect to his ideology, you can mention that he was racist, he was very against, he was very distrustful towards the Indians, and he hated the Indian national movement leaders, right? Or he hated them, right? So therefore this is how you can begin, that he had a racist outlook. So three things you can mention: racist outlook, distrusted Indians, and wanted to curb the INM. When we discuss the different policy measures, then this outlook should come out. So if you are mentioning this in the introduction, the policy measures should reflect this outlook, right? So therefore, if you look at the specific policy measures, then first of all, there was this Calcutta Municipal Corporation. Okay, so Calcutta Corporation Act, it came out in 1899, and as per that act, Lord Curzon decided that the number of elected members, they will be reduced and the number of nominated members will be increased, right? So therefore, what does it show? It shows that he wants to control the municipal corporation, and in those times, under the Bengali leaders like C.R. Das, etc., under those leaders, the Calcutta Municipal Corporation, it had become a platform for political aspirations of the Indians. It had become a platform for sort of like challenging the British rule, etc., etc., because it provided a platform where elected leaders, they could come, right? So he wanted to curb down the Bengali nationalism. He wanted to curb down the Indian national movement. So as part of that measure, he is bringing this particular reform, right? So therefore, the Calcutta Corporation Act, so when you mention this kind of title, first of all, you should be focusing upon the what part of it. So what it was, it's basically, it is decreasing the number of elected members. Right? What does this show? The government wants to handpick certain officials who will be running the Calcutta Corporation. So this is an anti-democratic attitude. So therefore, on this side, what you can mention, that this reflects distrust of Indians, and this also reflects anti-democratic attitude. Right? So this is how you can mention it, and it will consume your 1 point or 1 paragraph. The second aspect, now when you are continuing upon this thing, then the second aspect that you should talk about is, for example, you can talk about, we are right now talking about the fringe aspects, so you can talk about education. So it was under your Lord Curzon that your Indian Universities Act of 1904 came into existence. As per that act, all the universities, they would become affiliated to the government, that is, they will come under the control of the government. The government, it can then make rules and regulation for conduct in those universities. As a result, what will happen? You should know, as a student of history, as a student of society, that universities, they are the fertile grounds for rise of political leaders. Why? Because there is open expression of ideas, there is a culture of debate, etc., etc. So when the government is controlling a university, then in a way, the government, it wants to regulate the free speech, right? And free speech of whom? Free speech of the students who are discussing, debating the colonial rule. The government, it wants to regulate the expression of political ideas or different kinds of ideas. And what is the importance of universities? It is here that the political roots in any country, they take shape, right? So therefore, second aspect you can mention, the Indian Universities Act. So again, if you look at it, that what it was, so basically it brought the universities under the government control. But what is important? The what is not important. What do we derive from that? So our derivation is that he wanted to control the Indian universities because he wanted to control the freedom of speech, freedom of expression. He wanted to control the rise of political activity in the universities. Therefore, he wanted to control the political activities in the universities, and this particular thing, it is against the freedom of thought, right? So this is how you can go on to structure your answer. The next aspect that you can mention is again reflecting the distrust. First of all, he was the one who set up the Police Commission of 1902. As per the recommendation of the Police Commission of 1902, there were some positives. Positives, for example, state police services, they were brought out, right? Apart from this, so it was decided that certain educated Indians, they can be part of the police at the official level. At the lower levels, at the Daroga level, etc., obviously Indians were there. But as per the recommendation of the Police Commission of 1902, it was said that the Indian officials, they will stop in rank where the British officials begin. Meaning the Indians, they will always remain under the British officials. This reflects what? This reflects the distrust of the Curzon administration towards the Indians. He cannot trust the Indians to be part of official positions, because if Indians will become part of the official positions, then the Britishers, they do not have the faith that they will be loyal to the British in case of any protest is happening, or in case of any political development takes place, or any political movement begins, right? So therefore, Police Commission of 1902, and this particular feature of Police Commission of 1902, that the Indians, they can be officials, educated Indians, right? So first of all, the Britishers, they will pick and choose, and second of all, the Indians, they stop in rank where the Europeans begin or where the English begin. This reflects the distrust towards the Indians. State or provincial, you can write anything. Plus there was better training to officials and constables, so that is a small point. So educated Indians, they can be appointed. So educated Indians, they can be appointed, but will stop in rank where the British began. This reflects the distrust towards the Indians, right? So therefore, this is how you are beginning. You have been able to identify his mentality through these 3 points. You have been able to identify his mentalities, right? Apart from this, what you can mention is that small features. For example, point number 4. He appointed certain commissions to tackle, to resolve the problem of famines. During his regime of 1899 to 1905, a lot of famines that took place in Central India, in South India, right? So therefore, he established certain commissions that worked upon improvement or preventing the negatives which come out of famine. What is a famine? When there is scarcity of food, right? So therefore, he is establishing. EST is establishing. So he is establishing commissions, or he is establishing commission or a commission for disaster management, you can say. Right. So therefore, 2 components. First of all, we see that he is doing some reorganization of the police services, then better training to the officials and the constables, and then here we seeing that he is establishing commission for disaster management. That means yes, he was cruel, he was anti-democratic, but that does not mean that he was a bad administrator, right? So basically he was a control freak and he wanted to control the Indians. He did not tolerate any kind of political activity, but otherwise he was also trying to do, this administrative thing, administrative aspects he is bringing out. So therefore on that note you can mention some of the positives of Lord Curzon. Then another aspect is there, for example, as far as non-political domain is concerned, he is ready for reform. In Punjab he brought the Land Alienation Act 1900. In Punjab he brought out the Land Alienation Act of 1900. Why it was brought out? It was brought out because of the atrocities of the money lenders. Now your Punjab, it was part of Mahalwari area, Mahalwari settlement, and as a result the land ownership was with the individuals, right? Settlement was made with the Mahal, that is the community, but ultimately the land ownership, it is there with the people. Now the problem is because of the high land revenue demand, the farmers, they would become indebted to the money lenders, and because land has been created as a saleable commodity, as a legal right has been created in land has become a marketable commodity. You can, आप अपने land को गिरवी रख सकते हो, you can mortgage your land, you can sell your land. So therefore when they took loans from the money lenders, then they would give the papers of the land in lieu of that loan, and if they would fail to repay that loan, then they would lose the land, because the money lenders, they will become the landowners, right? So therefore Punjab Land Alienation Act tried to resolve this problem, and it said that in the case of non-payment of your debt, the land will still be protected. It will not be the case that your land is taken away. So therefore he worked towards the ownership rights of the peasants. So that is also again a positive feature. So 1900 Punjab Land Alienation Act. Protected peasants from loss of land to money lenders because of indebtedness, right? So therefore on the administrative side, till the point of time there is no anti-British kind of a thing, there is no political kind of a thing, then he is ready to work for the reforms, but otherwise he is of that particular outlook which you mentioned earlier, right? So therefore this is how you will arrive at a balance. This is how you can arrive at a balance. Now these particular aspects like Punjab Land Alienation Act, etc., you will not find during the discussion on Lord Curzon, which majorly happens in the chapter where the Swadeshi movement it is discussed, right? So therefore that is why whenever you read 1900 Punjab Land Alienation Act, you need to take cognizance of the fact that okay, इस time पे who was the Governor General, who was the Viceroy, right? So therefore ऐसा ध्यान में रखना है, ठीक है? Lastly, what we have is the partition of Bengal, so that will take the major aspect. So last part is the point number 6. It will become, his major decision was regarding the partition of Bengal. 1905. So therefore now next when we come to the evaluating the policy of partition of Bengal. So if we evaluate the policy of partition of Bengal, what do we feel that what were the reasons for it, right? So यहाँ space कम है, let us discuss here. Right. So decision for the partition of Bengal, it was taken in 1903, effected in, that is brought into practice in 1905. Right. So partition of Bengal. So first of all, how do you analyze this? You have to give approximately 30% area, 40% area to this particular space. Right, 30% to this particular space, 30% to the long-term impacts, and rest of the 40%, 30% you can give to these particular different other aspects, right? So how do we begin? So first of all, with respect to partition of Bengal, so what were the reasons for it? Right? What were the reasons for it? And on that basis, we'll be able to look at the impact. So on the reason side, if we evaluate the policy, so first of all, we need to see the reasons, right? And then we can look at the evaluation. So here what do we see? What was the reason? The Britishers said that Bengal, it is a very huge province. It has the largest population in India. And as a result, it has become administrative difficult to manage this particular province. It had areas of Bengal, Odisha, Bihar, areas of Assam, some parts of Chhattisgarh were also part of this Bengal province, right? So population, it was also huge. 8 crore population was there. So it became, they said that it has become administratively tough to manage this particular area. So for the purposes of administrative convenience, let us reduce its size. So therefore, for administrative convenience, that is what is written. And then this is the official reason. This is the official reason. On the evaluation side, what you will mention is that although yes, administration wise, it was the right decision, but the real intent of Lord Curzon was less administration feasibility, but more of checking the Indian national movement, because Bengal was the hub of the Indian national movement, right? So he said his idea was that Bengal united, it is strong, and Bengal divided, the Indian national movement will fizzle out, right? So therefore, what you say is that yes, it is correct. Yes, it had logic. But the real reason is as follows. So in this case, you can mention that Bengal was politically the most active state, especially till the arrival of Gandhiji, especially till the partition of Bengal. Majority of the things which took place, they took place in Bengal. So Bengal was the hub, Bengal and Maharashtra, and majorly Bengal, it was the hub of the Indian national movement. So by dividing the Bengal, they wanted to weaken the Indian national movement. So weaken the Indian national movement by dividing Bengal. And the second component will come from this dividing. You are dividing not just the territory, but you are also dividing the minds and the hearts of the people. How? It was a policy of divide and rule. So Lord Curzon adopted the policy of divide and rule when he partitioned Bengal, because after partitioning Bengal, what he was going to create was a Muslim majority province. The East Bengal would be a Muslim majority province. And as a result, the partition of Bengal, it was not opposed by the Muslims, who thought that now finally they can have their own nation in the sense their own province, where their leaders would have the sway. So therefore, as a result of this particular action increased the communal tendencies in India. It resulted in, it was a policy of divide and rule. Therefore, Curzon divided the Indians or the Bengalis. Right? That was his policy of divide and rule. And what is its impact? Its impact was visible also. The Muslims, they did not oppose the partition. Right? Example you can mention, that is there was no overwhelming participation of the Muslims in the Swadeshi movement. Right? Swadeshi movement, it happened because of the partition of Bengal. Right? So in retaliation, we wanted to hurt them economically also. So we said that we are going to boycott the British goods. Okay. So therefore, this is how your evaluation is going to take place. Next point, if we have a look at, then that is the long-term impact. So what was the long-term impact of the Swadeshi movement? Of the partition or the policies of Lord Curzon. So his major decision was regarding his major decision. So one line you can mention that he did some administrative reforms, etc. But the major component will come with respect to the partition. So what is the long-term impact of Curzon's policies? So the first long-term impact or the first impact of the Curzon's policies is that what begins? Swadeshi movement begins. Right? So much before the arrival of the Gandhiji, tools such as boycott of British goods, right, and other tools like picketing of the shops, etc., that began. So what we can write is that first of all, the long-term impact or the short-term impact, मतलब short-term impact से long-term impact आएगा. So basically we are saying that it resulted in Swadeshi movement, and Swadeshi movement will have certain long-term impacts. It resulted in Swadeshi movement. अब इसके क्या long-term impacts है? That is the answer to this particular question. So what is the long-term impact? First of all, Swadeshi movement. So therefore the Indians, the masses participated in this particular movement, and therefore the Indians, they are becoming aware about the economic colonialism. That is, the basic masses, they are becoming aware that if we boycott the British goods, then it will result in, it will hurt the Britishers. And therefore after your Swadeshi movement, in all other major movements, boycott of British goods became a major tool, major weapon in the hands of the people. So people are aware, more aware about the economic aspects of the British rule, right? The boycott of the British goods henceforth will become a major tool of INM. Why people are more aware? Because the leaders, etc., they are giving a call that boycott the British goods. And so the people come to know that, okay, this hurts the British, right? So therefore this is what I'm saying. Second aspect is, with respect to the Swadeshi movement, there was rise of nationalism like anything, and which continued like anything, right? Later on. So therefore there was rise of nationalism. Which never dissipated again. After this, the Indian national movement is rising, right? So therefore there is rise of nationalism. Apart from this, what do we see? During the Swadeshi movement, once the Britishers they cracked down, so therefore the underground activities they began. So therefore the Swadeshi movement or the actions of Lord Curzon, they resulted in laying the foundations of underground organizations, underground activities like Anushinal Samiti, etc., right? So therefore it laid the foundations laid the foundations of underground activity. And once your non-cooperation movement will dissipate, after that this underground organization, they will carry forward the work, right? So therefore it laid the foundations of the underground activity. Okay, Aman is asking how divide and rule affect the Indian independence movement. The divide and rule affected the Indian independence movement because the Indian independence movement, it is about participation of the people. So therefore, if Lord Curzon, he is bringing about divide and rule, and in a major movement like the Swadeshi movement, if the Muslim sections or the Muslim leaders, they are not participating, then it hurts the national unity, it hurts the strength of the Indian national movement. If a big chunk of the population, it is outside of the Swadeshi movement, then there is a problem, right? So therefore, that's the issue. The strength of the Indian national movement, it is coming down because because Muslims, they are not part of this particular movement, right? And later on, this divide and rule, which has been, propagated by Lord Curzon, this aspect we see in later movements also, right? As your rise of communalism takes place. It laid the foundations of the underground activity. Another important aspect is it laid the foundation of the working class movements. Because during the Swadeshi movement, the workers, they striked at work. Where? In the British factories, in the British jute mills. So wherever the Britishers were there, railways, etc. So therefore, wherever the owner of the capital was British, that is the factory or the plantation system, it was owned by the British, then the workers, they went on strike, right? So therefore, many strikes were organized. For example, C.R. Das organized strikes, etc., etc. So therefore, this is how what we are saying is that it laid the foundations for the working class movement. Specifically, for example, Bipin Chandra Pal, C.R. Das, they organized important worker strikes during the Swadeshis, right? And here the focus was on those enterprises which are of the foreigners. It laid the foundation of working class movement. Why? So therefore, solidarity of the working class, it is increasing, right? Then you can mention that it was here that your Bande Mataram became a major call, right? So Bande Mataram became a major call, and later on it continued to reverberate in the Indian national movement. So there was rise of symbolism, which continued even later on in the Indian national movement, right? So certain nationalistic symbols, they came into prominence. Example, Bande Mataram. Then your Rabindranath Tagore, he wrote Amar Sunar Bangla, which later on became the national anthem of the Bangladesh. Right? Then new methods were developed. So first aspect, new methods were developed during the Swadeshi movement, which came into use in the Indian national movement later on also. One method we have discussed in the form of boycott of British goods. So, right, and इसके अंदर एक और चीज लिख सकते हैं that Swadeshi movement, it reflected upon economic nationalism. मतलब वो words you can use differently. So new methods were developed, which will later be deployed. Right? What are these methods? So these methods are like boycott of British goods, Second, you can mention the use of Prabhat ferries. Right. Then use of plays. Right. Then organizational wise also committees were established. So basically committees, they came up in different parts. So therefore organizationally also Bengal is becoming superior, right? So therefore this is how, what you can mention is that this resulted in all of these things. So it had a huge long-term impact on the Indian national movement, because it was the first, actually when you discuss the modern Indian history, then after the moderate phase it begins in 1885, even before, but Indian National Congress, it is established in 1885. It is dominated by the moderate leaders, right? So therefore for the first time it is a movement. For the first time what we are seeing is, here you can mention the methods, that for the first time we are moving away from petitions. And went into mass action. Also for the first time it was also in a way extra constitutional struggle, which later on Gandhiji used. So it is also an extra constitutional struggle. So Gandhiji was not the pioneer of extra constitutional struggle. Extra constitutional struggle existed earlier also, just that he built the scale, he made it much more popular, he separated the violence from the extra constitutional struggle. Non-violent struggle can also be extra constitutional struggle. So so extra constitutional struggle, it is a new method. We moved away from petitions, we moved towards mass action. And what do we see? That overall what you can see is that now henceforth there will be domination of the extremists. Who are the extremists? Extremists are not the terrorists. Extremists are the people who want more aggressive opposition of the British rule, who want to move away from the petition. So this thing also you can mention, that there was now the balance of power shifted in favor of extremists. The extremist leadership became popular as compared to moderates. So what I have written, extremists henceforth popular among masses, therefore there is now a shift in the INC leadership, Indian National Congress leadership. So therefore this is how you can see that overall this is the long-term impact of the Lord Curzon's policies, and we are talking about the Swadeshi movement, and Swadeshi movement has a long-term impact, so therefore it is part of the impact of the decision. This decision of Lord Curzon to partition Bengal, ultimately it is resulting in all of these things. These are the long-term impact, but you have to have a long-term perspective. As a student, when you are writing the answer, you can write all these things, but maybe you end up neglecting the use of certain words. For example, when we are saying we moved away from petition towards mass action, and henceforth the extremists, they became popular among the masses. This resulted in a shift in the INC leadership in the future Indian national movement. So therefore there you are bringing the long-term aspects, right? So keep on mentioning the long-term aspects. So this is how you can deal with this particular question. एक बार ये वाला भी दिखा दीजिए, थोड़ा सा जूम आउट कर दीजिए, और एक बार ये वाला दिखा दीजिए. If people are interested, they can later on they can note down. Right now we can move to the next question. Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question that came is, since the decade of 1920s, the Indian national movement acquired various ideological strands, and therefore expanded its social base. Discuss. So these are the three components. First of all, they are giving us a time period that roughly discuss since 1920s, means you can discuss the events of the 1920s and after 1920s, right? So you don't have to be very rigid. तो इसमें confuse नहीं होना है कि since 1920s लिखा हुआ है, that means we need to talk about 1930 onwards, or we can talk about 1920 onwards. The major point is not 1920s. It is a rough timeline. The major point is that how the different ideological strands they entered into the Indian national movement, and how that resulted in expansion of the social base. When you say expansion of the social base, so when you read modern Indian history, then multiple times you come across such sentences that worker participated heavily for the first time. Women participated heavily for the first time. There was healthy participation of peasants. Or at times you encounter such sentences that Muslims did not participate, workers did not participate, capitalists opposed mass movement, different kind of things they come into picture. The operative word in this question is discuss. So when the word discuss is there, that means that you have to discuss both the aspects. Heavy orientation will be towards in favor of this statement, but yes, wherever there were certain deviating paths, wherever such ideology emerged, which instead of expanding the social base, sort of reduce the social base in favor of the Indian national movement, right? Then that also needs to be mentioned. Okay. So since 1920s, the different ideological strands. So number one, it is Gandhian ideology. Now, what is the Gandhian ideology? Gandhian ideology, it is based on non-violent, extra-constitutional, meaning he is in favor of mass action. Extra-constitutional struggle, and in fact you can add another word to make it even more elaborate, extra-constitutional mass struggle. That is, he was a mass leader, right? And since he was a mass leader, so first of all what you can mention, that because it was a non-violent movement, as a result, what is the impact, how it is expanding the social base? Because it is non-violent, so therefore the masses could participate. See, it is not possible for everyone, to take the beatings by the police. It is not possible for everyone to do a crime. It is not possible for everyone to murder someone, even if that someone is your oppressor. It is not possible for everyone to do robberies, to do dacoities in favor of the Indian national movement. That will be the work of revolutionaries, right? So therefore, if masses are to become part, that is how, in a very easy manner, simply you have to do one thing, you boycott the British goods. Ab bas kharido mat, even that is nationalism. So therefore, if I stop purchasing the British goods for my groceries or for my clothing, etc., then I am a nationalistic. So therefore, this great ideology of, he knew, Mahatma Gandhi का सबसे best non-violence का part ये था, that his innovative methods based on non-violence, they resulted in any layman person being part of Indian national movement, and that is because of non-violence. So therefore, what we see, that how it expanded the social base. First of all, this allowed mass participation. Specifically, can we say that since Mahatma Gandhi, right, he is following a non-violent approach, so therefore it will result in women joining the mass movement. But there was second factor. India was a very religious society and very conservative society. So no husband will send his wife or no brother will send his sister to the struggle. कि जी हम कहाँ जा रहे हैं? We are going for a mass struggle. Husband will be suspicious. Brother will be conscious that what about your safety? But because Mahatma Gandhi's ideology of high moral character was there, so therefore the husbands and the brothers, they felt safe that okay, our women, they can be part of the mass struggle. So therefore his high moral character, non-violent plus high moral character or high stress on morality, it led to participation of women. It led to participation of women. Right. So that is one aspect. Apart from this, Gandhiji, when even he began his struggle, so first of all, he always wanted a balance. So he was not a radical leader. He was radical with respect to his demands to the British. He was radical with respect to, because he was an extremist, right? He is believing in extra constitutional struggle. But at the same time, Gandhiji wanted to take all the different sections of the society together. So therefore, he would not take very strong positions in favor of the workers. He will not take very strong positions in favor of the peasants. He will not take very strong positions in favor of the landlords. He will try to maintain the point that there should be no hatred among the different sections, and he will try to seek reconciliation, right? So therefore, this aspect allowed everyone to join. This aspect allowed everyone to associate with Mahatma Gandhi. So therefore, what are we saying? That one of his ideology was inclusive politics. And this inclusive politics, for example, he took up caste questions, right? Even the upper caste are in favor of Mahatma Gandhi. But at the same time, he is taking up the caste question. He is taking up the worker questions. He is taking up the peasant question, but not too radically. His focus is on reconciliation. So inclusive politics and focus on reconciliation. This led to participation of very opposite kind of, people, like workers are members, certain zamidars are also member, although not very in a significant member, but capitalists are also in favor of Gandhiji, everyone. So participation of all sections, participation of capitalists, participation of workers, participations of peasants, participation of your some landlords, not all, but some landlords, right? So therefore, different sections of the society, they are coming together because of his inclusive politics, right? Apart from this, he also took up issues, Muslim issues, religious issues he also took up. So he was not averse, he was secular, but he was not averse to religion, right? For example, in the non-cooperation movement, he took up the issue of Khilafat, right? Khilafat movement. So therefore, it was related to the World War I that there should be a fair treatment to Khalifa, who was the religious head of the Muslim world, that is the head of the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire, it lost the World War I. So therefore, inclusive politics focus on reconciliation. इसमें एक और चीज बोल सकते हैं. So included Muslims also, and you can take the example of Khilafat movement. And otherwise also he was very, very secular. There were many INC leaders who were Muslims, right? So he did not take any communal position also. He was inclusive. So being non-communal will also be part of inclusive politics. So this is how you can briefly mention about Gandhiji. Next, what you can talk about it, you can give certain examples also. That highest participation, one of the biggest participation, it was in the civil disobedience movement. right? You can also mention that by the time of Quit India movement of 1942, such level of mass participation had happened that despite the Congress leadership being jailed even before the movement began, still Quit India movement saw participation of different sections of the society, right? That is the result of what? That is the result of Mahatma Gandhi. Another thing what you can mention is ideology. So it is not connected with ideology, but what you can mention is that he was a great organizer. So he was the person who was responsible for building the modern organization of the Indian National Congress by establishing your Congress working committees, etc. So therefore he is the person who is responsible for organizational strength of the Congress. As a result, you see, he is responsible for penetration of the Indian national movement and its ideas to the grassroots level. Therefore, ensured strength of Indian national movement at the grassroots levels. This is what you can mention, right? So, he is responsible. This is way you can talk about Mahatma Gandhi. Then what you can talk about, so Mahatma Gandhi, he will take a lot of space. Then you can talk about the leftist movement. So, leftist movement became very, very prominent. For example, there was rise of workers and peasant parties after the 1920s. In the 1920s, right, at the end of 1920s, All India Trade Union Congress also came into existence. So, you can take certain example of certain organization. That is what you're talking about. The next ideological stand that we are talking about is leftism, right? So what you can mention here, where is the beginning of leftism? So in the introduction, one line you can mention that there was rise in the working class solidarity during the time of Swadeshi movement. However, it was in the 1920s that workers, they properly came to be organized in their class organizations. And what do you mean by class organization? So here you can give certain examples. You can talk about WPPs, that is workers and peasant parties. Of 1920s. Second, you can talk about All India Trade Union Congress, established specifically in 1928. Year is not important, but we are talking about 1920s, right? So therefore, what we see is that there is rise of class organizations. Then you can talk about 1922 Gaya session also, where the Indian National Congress decided that we are going to take up the question of the working class, etc., and the peasant class. Anyways, a lot of details are there, but ultimately you have to focus on summarizing this content. So first trend that we see is in the leftism that there was rise of leftism. अच्छा, ideological कैसे? ये तो सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट बात है, इंटरकनेक्शन बिटवीन वर्ल्ड हिस्ट्री एंड मॉडर्न हिस्ट्री. सो इसका बिगिनिंग क्या रहेगा? सबसे पहले बिगिनिंग यू विल बी टॉकिंग अबाउट द रशियन रेवोल्यूशन ऑफ 1970. Russian Revolution of 1917, it resulted in rise in the popularity of the ideas of the left wing. In 1920, your Communist Party was established in Tashkent. Then Communist Party was again reorganized, established in 1925. So therefore, we see 1920s is where the left is organizing itself in form of certain organization. And what is the beginning point? The beginning point is the Russian Revolution. So Russian Revolution of 1917, this provides the impetus, right, to leftism. So this is resulting in rise of leftism, right? You can also talk about, so as I mentioned that in 1920 and then again in 1925, twice actually. Book में देख लो दोनों बार लिखा हुआ है, एक बार ताशकंद में, एक बार इंडिया में. Right, your Communist Party of India, it is being established, right? Then what is happening that in your Indian National Congress, many worker leaders, they are coming into picture. Like later on, your So Congress Socialist Party was there, right? So many worker leaders, you can mention the CSP, you can mention Jawaharlal Nehru, you can mention Subhash Chandra Bose. So many worker leaders, they became part of the Indian National Congress. Worker leaders joined INC. You can talk about your JP, you can talk about your Jawaharlal Nehru, Subhash Chandra Bose, other leaders you can talk about, right? S.A. Dange, etc. They were part of the CPI. So worker leaders, they joined the INC. As a result, what is happening? Now we have to focus upon expanding of the social base. What is now happening is that the two questions will be there. When two questions they merge, that is the class interest questions and the Indian national movement, that is the political questions. So therefore what is happening is that the workers, they will not be just fighting for their class interest. They will not be just fighting that we want increase in wages, that we want right to form trade unions, etc., etc. But what they will be focusing upon is they are also becoming part of the Indian national movement. So therefore from all of these things, what you can say is that therefore the workers, they became part of Indian national movement. Especially what you can talk about is when colonialism was connected with capitalism. So like earlier, Lala Lajpat Rai, he had talked about that why there is colonialism. There is colonialism because there is capitalism. So therefore this is how the ideologically or conceptually this connection was made. Colonialism and capitalism. So therefore when the workers, they are fighting for overthrow of the British rule, they are fighting also for overthrow of capitalism. So this is how your workers are, they are becoming part of the Indian national movement. Here however you can say that the Communist Party of India, which control not all the workers but some of the workers, over a period of time they came to perceive the Indian National Congress as a party of bourgeois or the middle class. Why? Because the Communist International or the Russia, it has said so. Second aspect, so therefore they, in the 1930s, the communists, they became sort of anti-Indian National Congress. As a result, in the civil disobedience movement, the CPI, it is not having a great participation. Similarly, what is happening when your Second World War is going on, then Russia, it is fighting, USSR, it is fighting on the sides of Britain. So when the Quit India movement happens in 1942, Russia and Britain are friends. So therefore Communist Party of India feels that we should not be part of, the workers, they should not be part of the Quit India movement. So therefore what are we saying is that leftism, aisa nahi tha that it always expanded the social base, at times it also reduced the social base. Why? Because it used to take directions from Russia. So what we can say is that the Russian influence however decreased social participation. So here you can talk about, for example, the Quit India movement specifically of 1942. Plus in 1930s, CPI saw INC as bourgeois party, bourgeois, right? So therefore this is how you can mention leftism. Then the third point what you can talk about is, capitalist movement or capitalism. So first of all you can mention in the introduction that since the beginning itself the moderates, they were coordinating with the capitalist class, right, and their demands from the British were always in favor of the Indian capitalists, right, in favor of the Indian capitalists. Overall what you can say, like in 1927 FICCI was established, right. Second aspect that you can say is that the capitalist class, it became part of Indian national movement. How? Because Indian National Congress, because they thought that they can utilize the Indian National Congress for getting concessions. right? So struggle policy of Mahatma Gandhi was there. Anyway, उतना detail में जाते हैं. Simple point is that they supported the Indian national movement. They supported Indian national movement, although उनका एक interest रहता था that they can gain certain policy concessions from the British. So therefore they supported the Indian national movement. Next aspect that you can mention is that they never decided to negotiate with the British without the consent of the INC. Without the consent of the INC, right? However, एक negative side पे क्या बोल सकते हैं? On the negative side, they were not in favor of mass movement for a long period of time because that would disrupt business. Because it will disrupt business. So in this sense, you can mention that the capitalists, they supported the Indian national movement, they supported the INC, and therefore they also became part of the Indian national movement. In fact, they were the part of the Indian national movement since the inception of the Congress itself, right? Fourth point, what you can talk about is participation in the form of your revolutionary terrorism, right? Matlab, it is an ideological strand. So when you talk about revolutionary terrorism, then what you are saying? You are basically saying that your post non-cooperation movement, when it was withdrawn, then after that the people, they got disenchanted and there was rise of revolutionary terrorism, right? So this is also an ideology which became famous, right? However, it brought the British repression, and therefore and the second aspect is that they established heroic examples, and therefore they provided inspiration to the masses, and therefore in that sense it is contributing to popularity of nationalistic ideas among the masses. It is an inspiration for mass nationalism. So this is how your revolutionary terrorism, it is assisting in spreading the ideas of modern nationalism. Apart from this, there is this aspect of communalism. So communism rises majorly post withdrawal of non-cooperation movement, post non-cooperation movement and Khilafat movement, right? And here what happens is it basically decreases the social base. So you can talk about 1920s, you can talk about the Shuddhi movement, you can talk about the Tanzeeb and Tabligh movement, reconversion. So therefore, because it is a divisive force, so therefore what we see is that communalism, it decreases the social base and ultimately it also contributes to partition. So as part of the discussion, you can mention that this prevented the participation of Muslims. Communalism prevented the participation of Muslims in Indian national movement because the Muslim leaders, they saw Indian National Congress as a party of the Hindus. So therefore it is having a negative effect on the social base, right? So this is how we can talk about. Lastly, you can also talk about women, but in the case of women, your Mahatma Gandhi, he played a major role. Apart from this, you can mention certain leaders like your Sarojini Naidu, you can mention Annie Besant, you can mention Aruna Asaf Ali, right? When you mention Aruna Asaf Ali, then you can talk about her role in Quit India movement. So he basically, she tried to coordinate your this thing. She tried to give assistance to the people who were, escaping out of the British operation, etc. So therefore, this is how you can mention. You can mention some other organization of women also, right? Then caste movements also you can mention. Point number 7, that certain caste movements. So there again, the role of Mahatma Gandhi, it will also come into picture, right? That Mahatma Gandhi, he popularized the concept of amelioration of the negatives of the caste. So therefore, this is how the low caste movement, it became part of the Indian national movement, right? You can mention, so itna bahut hai is question ke liye. So in this sense, you can, talk about this question. So Thank you for your time. I saw one question on the screen. It was not related to these two questions, so that's why we are not discussing it. Also, there is paucity of time. Otherwise, when you talk about the different foreigners who contributed to the Indian national movement, then you will be talking about what? First of all, you will be talking about, for example, you will be talking about during the time of establishment of the Indian National Congress, during the establishment of Indian National Congress, there were certain foreigners who contributed to the setup of the Indian National Congress. You can talk about A.O. Hume. Then there are a couple of presidents of the Indian National Congress who were foreigners in the beginning time. Then you can talk about Annie Besant. Okay. Then yeah, यही वाले हैं जिनके बारे में मेजरली बात की जा सकती है. मतलब these are the major ones, right? Who you can say that they contributed to the Indian national movement. And before, if you go to the pre-part of the Indian national movement, then during the Indigo revolts, the certain missionaries also, like James Long, he wrote article against the indigo planters. He suffered 1 month of jail and 1,000 rupees fine also during the Indigo revolt of 1860. Right, so this is how we can answer that question. Anyways, so thank you for your time. The next teacher is going to be with you for further discussion. God bless you.